Hi VC, Dark Dove back with you, and we've got to 77 in Freddy's ongoing Gimmie 10 70s series. I've just watched Freddy's update there just about half an hour ago, so uh, it, yeah, it's quite kind of inevitable that quite a few of the albums that Freddy shows that I'm going to end up showing as well here myself. There are a couple. Um, but some other stuff as well, but it really was a difficult one. The 77 choices. I had several albums in my head that I was just dying to show, and then it just turns out, yeah, I just have to leave so much stuff out. Some of the stuff that I wanted to show, I wanted to show Gong live, but in the end I decided, well, it was mainly, it's not really representative of 77 because it was mainly recorded in between 73 to 77, or 73 to 75, and it was released, around the time that, they'd gone into the, Pierre Morlane's period. So another one I wanted to show is this, Live at the Roxy 1977. Ended up not making the cut. Parliament Live, had to, yeah, these are not part of my top 10. These are also Rand's, Parliament Live, and the Grand P-Funk Earth Tour, and really wanted to have this in my top 10 because it's one of my very few reggae albums, but Jump the Fence by Winston Wright, but sadly had to leave that out as well. Okay, so my official rundown of the top 10 albums of 77, but as I said in my comments on Freddy's video, there are at least 3 classic albums from 77 which I do not own on physical format, those being Television Marquee Moon, Wire Pink Flag, and Suicide self-titled debut. All 3 of those I only have on physical, I only have on download. I don't have them on any kind of physical format, so unfortunately I cannot show those 3. Despite them, if I did have them, they would definitely be in this top 10. But just bear with me 2 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, I thought for a second I had too many. But starting off with my official top 10. Yes, I know Freddy showed this, but this is one of my absolute favourite albums of all time. Not to mind Bowie or 77. Low, of course, one of 2 albums he put out in 77 as part of the Berlin trilogy. And this album, I used to listen to this. I remember taping it onto cassette. I remember I borrowed the CD from the music library sometime in the late 90s, and I used to do that a lot. I used to make these tape CDs, had my own cassettes, and I just played this. I played this album just incessantly. I was obsessed with this album, and I still am. David Bowie, Low. Yeah, what more is there to add about it? Yeah, you all know, you're all familiar with that album. An album of 2 halves, collaboration with Eno, one half mainly instrumental, and of course sister album to Heroes, which she released the same year. And of course they were all kind of part of a quadrology, I suppose you could say, because Bowie was also involved in 2 albums which Iggy Pop released that year. One being Lust for Life, which Freddy has shown, and the other being The Idiot. So two albums which Iggy brought out. Very, very different cover to the one for Lust for Life. There's some painting that he's maybe by Egon Schiele, I think, that he's copying there. But this is a darker, much darker album, I think, than Lust for Life. Sister Midnight, Night Clubbing is a really dark, kind of crawling, kind of, it's got this kind of creeping quality, that kind of slow kind of thing. The closing track, Mass Production, is a kind of a precursor to industrial rock, I think. It's got this really disturbing kind of synth hook that goes through that opens and closes the song, and it's an extremely dark album, and I mean, either this or Lust for Life could be an easy contender for my top 10, but I chose this. Iggy Pop, The Idiot. So 77 was, of course, the year that punk rock broke, but prog wasn't totally dead at this stage, particularly continental or European prog, and this is an album which came out, which was released as the soundtrack to a movie by Dario Argento, and that movie was called Suspiria. And this is by the band Goblin, who had previously scored for Fondo Rosso, aka Dark Red. So anybody who's seen the movie Suspiria will know that it's part of a genre known as giallo, which is kind of particularly Italian take on the slasher movies, and has a very strong visual thing going through it. But this movie, it had a kind of a supernatural theme, but this soundtrack perfectly encapsulates the film. Is a really creepy opening theme, and it had a different cover, by the way, the original Italian release. This is the UK edition, which came out actually the following year. But it's progressive rock, but it's a particularly Italian style, and so it's. I saw the movie on the big screen, by the way. It's one that you really have to see on the big screen to really kind of fully appreciate it, and the Goblin soundtrack on speakers, coupled with the visuals of the movie, is something that you won't forget in a hurry. Moving on, John Martyn, One World. This is a strong contender for one of John Martyn's best albums. This was recorded in Jamaica. I think it was recorded in Jamaica, or maybe Barbados. I'm not 100% sure, but there's a strong kind of there's a reggae influence running through this. Particularly on Big Muff, and the title track One World is an absolutely beautiful track, and John Martyn had a really great run of albums through the 70s, kind of round up, probably up to about Grace and Danger 1980, but this is probably up there, I think, with I've already shown it. Solid Air, I think, but yeah. Anyway, and for the purpose of 77, definitely deserves a place in the top 10. Now for something a little different. 1977, it was the year of punk, but there were kind of weird experimental rumblings going on from an area of Hackney in East London, and this is an album which came out right at the end of 1977, and that is Second Annual Report by Throbbing Gristle. And now this was really one of the earliest examples of what would come to be known as industrial music, released on their own label Industrial Records, which gave the musical genre its name. So basically there were a four-person collective who, Throbbing Gristle, they grew out of a commune known as Coombe Transmissions, who had been active since the early 70s. Basically, this had a totally different cover on its initial release. This is a reissue on Mute Records from the early 80s, but originally it had a kind of a plain white sleeve with just the I think it's a stickered sleeve. But anyway, this is an extremely disturbing and dark album. Quite controversial subject matter dealing with murder, rape, serial killers, and that's kind of the first half. Second half then is a very long track, After Cease to Exist, which is kind of almost like a darker take on Tangerine Dream, and it's kind of exploring the more electronic elements which Chris Carter brought into the group. But it initially had a very limited release, but it was reissued at various points over the years. This is a Mute reissue from the early 80s, but a highly influential album and band, and they would go on to have quite a very, very influential impact on a lot of music that would come in the following years, in the late 70s and well into the 80s. Okay, so yeah, Fred showed this as well, but I could not show this. As Freddy said, this is just an absolutely massively influential album. Kraftwerk, Trans-Europe Express just went on to really influence, especially the development of electronic music and the likes of house music in the United States. It had a big impact in places like Chicago and Detroit. Massively sampled, a big influence on the emerging hip hop movement, who the title track, which was massively sampled. But yeah, so what else is there to say about it? But Freddy went into quite extensive detail on this, so I won't dwell too long on it. So Trans-Europe Express by Kraftwerk. Staying in Germany, Michael Rother, formerly of Neu. This is his debut solo album, Flammende Herzen, recorded in 76 and released in 77, although this is actually an early 80s reissue. Yeah, so this kind of following a slightly, well, it's kind of similar feel to Neu, perhaps perhaps slightly more in common with Harmonia, say, maybe a bit more melodic, there's quite a strong lineup on this. Michael Rother himself, Jackie Leibswit of Can on drums, and can I just add that this is actually well, I just have to take the seller's word for it, but this is a signed copy, and this is actually signed by Michael Rother himself and by Jackie Leibswit. Anyway, enough about that. The album itself, yeah, so one of a string of extremely good albums that Michael Rother released in the wake of Noi, Bowling, and yeah. So you know, if you like what the collaborations they did with Eno and with Harmonia, this is really a good indicator of well, that sort of thing. Okay, moving on. Okay, moving on to the Eno again. Yeah, I know Freddy showed this as well. I did say that I would be showing a few that Freddy showed, but just really could not leave this out. Brian Eno, Before and After Science. Yeah, so again, yeah, Freddy went into quite extensive detail about it, but I will, while I have it out, it does. I'm quite privileged to have an original copy that has the these prints, prints which originally came with it. So all designed to kind of represent different aspects of the various songs on the album. So these prints were created by Peter Schmidt, especially in collaboration with Eno to release, and they were included in first pressings of the album. So very lucky to have a copy that came with the prints. But anyway, the album itself, yeah, so it's one of his best 70s albums, really. Probably one of the last that he did for a while, which kind of significantly featured kind of conventional songs, because it was kind of from this point onwards then that he started going off and exploring the more ambient aspect of his work with the following year with Music for Airports. But that's another story. That's another update. Okay, now this is one I have to show. It is the only album I have featuring Gil Scott-Heron. This is one he did in collaboration with Brian Jackson, and this is called Bridges. So some of the tracks here, We Almost Lost to Troy, and A Racetrack in France, I think is one of my favorite tracks on this. So yeah, so it's kind of not so much of the spoken word kind of element on this one, but it's a great soul jazz record, and yeah, so it is the only album by Gil Scott-Heron that I have in my collection. So I know he's a VC favorite, but it's definitely a very strong album, and I think a strong contender for the top 10 of 77. Now I'll finish with kind of an obvious choice, but Couldn't leave this one out. Talking Heads 77, debut album. Not I wouldn't classify it as their best. I mean, their best was yet to come, but it is an extremely strong debut album. You know, it could be counted as one of the strongest debuts ever by a band, but of course, Psycho Killer, Don't Worry About the Government, yeah. So, I mean, their best was yet to come. You know, in their trio of Eno produced albums, but this one is not to be overlooked. This is certainly a very, very auspicious opening to a band who were many years ahead of them of absolutely fantastic influential releases. So okay, we're on 20 minutes, or 21 minutes, so leave it at that. That's my top 10 and my kind of runners up for 77. So thanks for watching, and hope everybody has a great weekend.